Okay, we emerged from last year, Kufiyat Gimel Halacha Tezayin, the end of Bishul Akum. The Mechaber said this: Kalim shebishul behem ha'av kicham lefanenu, dvarim sheish behem mishum bishuli av kicham. A guy cooked in front of us foods that are Bishul Akum. Meaning he cooked it in front of us, meaning we know he used kosher ingredients. He wasn't cooking in his house, so the food is all kosher, but he cooked it Bishul Akum. So tzrichim hafshir. So after the guy cooked in those kelim, if you want to use those kelim for kosher, you have to kash the kelim. V'yeshemim she'enim tzrichim. There are those who hold that it doesn't have to be kasher, and we'll explain why in a second. Even if you hold that it needs to be kasher, in hu klicheres, if it's a klicheres, so you would say, oh, it's a klicheres, you can't kasher it, you should have to throw it out. No, the din is makil shalosh palmim, v'da'i kasher 3 times, and that's enough. But nei she'en li isur zeh ikar b'teraisa. This is an isur she'en li ikar b'teraisa. I hope we're going to get to talk about this. If not, we did talk about it when we learned in Agol's Kelim, but if not, we'll see if we can get to talk about it. Okay. Now the Ramah says, if a guy cooked for a chayil on Shabbos, which was mutter, you're allowed to cook Bishul Akum. A chayil is allowed to eat Bishul Akum on Shabbos. So now, mutter l'motzoi Shabbos afilu l'bari. The food that he cooked, which was cooked beheter, is a mutter for a bari, meaning that he's not sick, and also it's not after Shabbos. You don't have any doichik to need the food. The reason why he's allowed to cook for the guy, someone needs to cook for the chayil, so you're allowed to make Bishul Akum. After Shabbos, people can cook fresh food, even so it's mutter after Shabbos. The Ein Ba Mishum Bishul Akum, it's also not Bishul Akum. 2 things. The Chol Ki Agavna Heker Iker, there's a Heker, Mitzvah, we'll get to that, we'll talk about that. Okay, we just had to read it because it's going to get the whole thing together. These 2 halachas are very connected to each other. Okay, so what's going on here? Okay, the Rashba says, it's the very end of the Rashba in Tersavayis, says, in Tersavayis on Bishul Akum, says, if you have the case in the Mechaber says, you have a Shefah who cooks for herself in the house. Okay, so she's using your ingredients, your food, so you know she's cooking kosher, but she's cooking by herself. So he says the Yid should make sure to do something to make her food Bishul Yisroel. When he works on it, should stir the pot, whatever different things that he could do, because if not, the kelim are going to have to be kasher, or if they're going to be cheres, they're going to have to be thrown out. That's what the Rashba says. The Raw says that no, the Raw is not right there. It's a couple pages beforehand. The Raw says that any isser that has to do with chasnas has kulas to it. The isser like Bishul Akum that has to do with chasnas only applies when there's a problem of chasnas. He says there's no chasnas to eat blias of Bishul Akum. Blias of Bishul Akum wouldn't make you feel especially connected to this person. So therefore, there's no isser to eat those blias. Okay, and the food that she made is Bishul Akum. You couldn't eat that food. The blias can't lead to chasnas, and he brings rayas not only from Bishul Akum, from other halachas. All the other halachas that do with chasnas, things that have to do with chasnas, he wants to say only, or sometimes only apply if there's going to be chasnas. But if there's not going to be chasnas, then he said there's no chashash.
Did he say that even if something is cooked with a Bishul Akum?
I'm about to get to that. Okay, so the Rashba, he's not responding to the Ra'ah, but the Rashba says he brings a riot to this from a Sefer Truma, from a Rishon, who says if you have Bishul Akum, food that's Bishul Akum, and some of that food gets mixed into food that's other food. Okay, in these cases we had it's a halacha back in Kufi Beis. It gets mixed into other food, then that food is also. So he says you see that there's an issue of that even though there's no issue of even though the blia wouldn't cause chasnas, even though the blia wouldn't cause lead to chasnas, still you see that it's also. So you see that there's such a concern. He's not saying that lafuke the raw, but I mean lafuke is such a shita like the raw is saying. Okay, even though there's no concern of chasnas. So there's a tshuva in the Marashtam who says he argues he doesn't like this raya. He says he doesn't say it's wrong. He says you could question this raya because the cases. This is what Yosef is saying. The cases are not the same. In the case of the Sefer Truma, you had food of cooking that was Bishul Akum, and some of that food spread over into the food. It like rolled over across into the food that's Bishul Yisrael. So when the blia hit the kosher food, what was it? It was trade food going into the kosher food. It's food that if you would eat it would cause chasnas, going into the kosher food. Maybe only in that case the Sefer Truma was machmir. But what happens if the food got absorbed into a kli? Absorbed into a kli can't cause chasnas anymore. At that point, the food is heter. When the food is heter, now when it gets absorbed back into your kosher food, it shouldn't cause a problem. And maybe the Sefer Truma, he says, maybe the Sefer Truma was only machmir in his case because when the food got absorbed into the kosher food, it was tray food getting absorbed in. It was Bishul Akum being absorbed in. Now, once it's absorbed, it won't cause chasas, but it's too late. It already made the food tray. But if it went into the kli first, so now it's in the kli. Now in the kli it's heter. In the kli it's heter. So now it can't ask for something because it can't cause chasas anymore. Once it's a bleed, it can't cause chasas anymore. So at that point, it can't cause chasas. Now it can't ask the next food also. Okay? He says you could question the raya from the Sefer Truma, but I mean, as you understand, the Rajba didn't like that. The Rajba didn't say it. The Rajba says there is a raya from there. The Marshtam brings a raya that he's right. He says the Torah brought this din back in, I think it's in Kufi base. The Torah brings this Sefer HaTruma and it's the din. It's a halacha back in, I'm sorry. It's halacha base, sorry. In Kufi halacha gimel. It's halacha brought in Shulchan Aruch that food is usher. Yet by our case about bliyas, we have 2 days, and the Torah we're leaning towards being machmir that a kli has to be kashir after Bishul Akum. So he says, can't be that din is a right to our din, because here's the Torah, and Shulchan Aruch himself brings over there the Torah brings it over there, it's usher, and over here the Torah says that it's mutter. The Torah says you don't have to kasher kelim after Bishul Akum. The Torah brought that din that the Sefer Truma brings, the din that if the food spreads into the other food, the food is usher. He says, so obviously the Torah didn't hold it that was such a right. Okay? Not from the Mechaber, I'm sorry, from the Torah. The Torah brings that there it's usher, and here it's mutter. Okay, so he thinks that supports what he thinks. Okay. So what's the machlokes between these 2 days? Put this now on the side. Okay? It's indented. Put this shadow on the side. What's the machlokes between the Rajba and the Raw? What's this machlokes? The Rajba says that the kelim have to be kashered, and the Raw says the kelim don't have to be kashered. Okay? So Rabbi Shefah explained like this. This is how he explained what the machlokes is. The Rajba uses these words that the foods that Chazal aser, the reason that they asked it may have been because of chasas, but once they asked it, they consider it to be machalos hasuras. Once they give it that status that this is machalos hasuras, what's the din of machalos hasuras? The din is that if you have machalos hasuras in your kelim, you have to kasher them. That's the rule. If you put them in your kelim, you have to kasher them. The fact that the reason for the gzeira doesn't apply anymore has nothing to do with it. Once it's considered machalos hasuras, they made a takana. Even though the reason for the takana doesn't apply anymore, but Lamai says it is a takana, and it's over now. You have to kasher the kelim and the raw.
Why can you? So if it's machalos hasuras, why by klicheres?
We'll get that. Hopefully we'll get that. Why klicheres is special? Okay, just hold that a second. But the raw holds. Chazal didn't make it Bishul Akum. Chazal just said is you shouldn't eat food that a god cooked because if the god cooked it, it might lead to chasnas. Okay, if you want to say it in different words, according to the raw, it's a gavra. It's also for you to do it. It has something to do with the food. The food didn't become usher. You shouldn't do it because it might lead to chasnas. As opposed to the Rajba, who's, if we want to use those kind of words, the Rajba holds it's like an issa chefzer. Thing becomes machal sasuras. Okay, so now another application of that child. Rabbi Shefah says. So what's another nafkamina between this thing? Do you think that is the food machal sasuras or not? Is does the food need to be bought to b'shishim or bought to b'roiv? If you hold it's machal sasuras, then it needs to be bought to b'shishim. Machal sasuras, the rules are machal sasuras gets bought to b'shishim, and therefore if you had Bishul Akum mixed into foods, it would be need bit to b'shishim. If you hold that it's not machal sasuras, it's just you're not supposed to eat the food. It doesn't have those special rules on machal sasuras of like tam ki'ikr kind of rules. So what is it? You need bit to b'roiv only. As long as the thing that you have in front of you is not the isser, it's mainly another thing. Bit the b'roiv says we treat this as b'roiv, not this thing. It's not the food. Then you'd be allowed to eat it. Okay. So the raw, according to the raw, would be bit the b'roiv, and according to the raj, we need bit the b'shishim. Okay. No. So what's the din? What's the din? Is Bishul Akum bought the b'roiv or it's bought the b'shishim? So the din is that it's bought the b'roiv. Okay, we've had it beforehand. We had it. The Shach brings it right over here again. We had that beforehand. So we've seen that before. That we pass in. It's a shiloh. Whether it's bought the b'roiv or bought the b'shishim, we pass in that it's bought the b'roiv. Okay, what does that mean? Really passing in the svara like the raw.
Was it a Gemara and somewhere? Where was the source?
That it's bought the b'roiv or b'shishim? No. It's really. He's saying it's an outgrowth. It's a shiloh in the Rishonim. Which one it is?
Yeah, by Shechter.
Yeah, he's saying that it's connected to the same shiloh. So he says. So he says this that we say that you have to kasher your kelim is a chumrah. It's not really minhadin. Really, if we follow the logic of all the other dinim, you would not have to kasher your kelim. That's why there's a day that the Mechaber even brings both days that maybe you don't have to kasher your kelim. And this that we kasher is just mitam chumrah. Okay, we're l'chumra treating it like machal sasuras, even though in other applications, we're going to talk more of them in a second, we don't treat it like machal sasuras. And
So
Raya,
you should be machmir that it's not batal b'roiv?
no, that much we don't go. In this part,
What's the difference? Because
why do we choose that? I'm not sure why.
you can't use the food, because the food we lost. You can fix.
Maybe that's what it is. Okay, maybe that's the reason. We're extra machmir about this, because this would be... Okay, now, I don't know, because the next thing I'm going to tell you is, to support what Rabbi Shach is saying, he brings a Chuvas Haran. Okay, there's a Chuvas Haran talks about it. The Beis Yosef brings a few words from the Chuvas Haran. The Chuvas Haran is talking about a Shaila, very related, but not at all our Shaila. He's talking about grape jelly. Okay? You take grape juice, which is stam yain, it's mamash with stam yain, and then you turn it into jelly. And he's going, nowadays that the stam yain is also not because of, they might have used it probably the Zara, but because of chasnas also. He says jelly, there's no chasnas from jelly, it's not grape anything. So if you took stam yain and you turned it into jelly, basically, jelly, would that wine be usher? So he says, he brings the ra'ah, and he says, according to the ra'ah, since there's no concern of chasnas anymore, you'd be allowed to eat the jelly. It started off as isser, and you'd be allowed to eat it. The Chuvas Haran. You should be allowed to eat it. The Beis Yosef brings a few words from it. That's what he says. He says, but since, he says in Svara, that's what you should do. That would be correct. He says, since others argue on that, since there are others who don't agree, like this, the Sefer Truma, I don't remember if you mean Sefer Truma, since there are others who argue on the Ra, therefore you should be machmir and not eat that food. Okay? The way he says it is his way, which is, min hadin really is correct the other way. In Svara and logic, if we follow through whatever else we're familiar with, we would have said that you'd be allowed to eat that jelly. He's not talking about the Bishul Akum, but it's the same child. You'd be allowed to eat it. So he says, but will be machmir and say, like the Rav in this part, you shouldn't eat it. Now over there he's talking about the food itself. Okay, so I don't know if your chiluk is going to work anymore. But I'm saying, but the Ran says it as and the Avnei Nezer is even stronger about it. Avnei Nezer also makes this connection that Shefah is making between the Bittul B'Shishim and Kash and Kale, that same Shiloh. So the Ran is saying that we took it as the din might be like this, and we're choosing to be machmir in the kelim or in the jelly cases. In certain cases, we're machmir. I have to tell you, even the Ra'ah himself, the truth is, the Ra'ah says that when we say that things that are usher for chasnas are usher only when there's a chash of chasnas, the Ra'ah says it's not always. In specific cases, Chazal let us get off the hook with that chasnas. I mean, you're not going to find that in every single application did we say that if there's no chash of chasnas, then you don't have to be choshesh or Bishul Akum. The Ra'ah says and he brings rayos from different examples where there's no chasnas, we took off the Yisroel. It doesn't mean in every case. Okay? I don't know if it has to be.
It's a third cooked. It's not really the chasnas.
Oh, so who says that? That's what the Avnei Nezer is talking about. The Avnei Nezer is talking about whether that din of food that's a food. He says that's totally the same machlokes. The Rajban Ra'ah is the same Rajban Ra'ah. He says it's also totally the same machlokes.
And according to Ra'ah, a third cook wouldn't be usher?
He says I forgot to say Lashut Asa. He says it's no, not Lashut. If the guy cooked it a third and then the Yid come and cooked it afterwards, could he be Isser HaChoyz L'Hatera? Could you take the Isser off? It's totally the same thing. No, so you.
I wasn't talking about that, but I was just talking about if you're going to cook the third cook and stop. You're allowed to
stop cooking. So why?
It's not like Shulchan Aruch right now.
Oh, we talked about it. It's considered Aruch Shulchan Aruch. Okay, we do consider it Aruch Shulchan Aruch. He meant this, the case. If I remember, the Avnei talks about the case where the guy cooked it more than a third cook, and now you want it's Isser. Could you get it back afterwards and make it back afterwards? He taught his son. Okay. Now, another application of this machlokes, the Rajban the Ra'ah, is what the Ramah talks about. That's why I read the Ramah so quickly. Is what the Ramah talks about. What happens if you cooked for a choil on Shabbos? Okay. So the din is, if you cook for a choila she'en b'sakana, a choila is allowed to be over on Yisroel Drabanan, many Yisroel Drabanan. It's later in your day in Kuf Nun Hey. The Ramah brings it over there. You're allowed to do many Yisroel Drabanan, except Yisuri Achila. Yisuri Achila, things that are Asa B'Achila Midrabanan, a choila is not allowed to eat. A choila she'en b'sakana is not allowed to have. So, if you had a question, is a choila allowed to eat Bishul Akum? You would say, no, a choila is not allowed to eat Bishul Akum. Okay, because if you look just at in Kuf Nun Hey, you would say a choila is not allowed to eat Bishul Akum because it's a drabanan. But the din is not like that. The din is that a choila is allowed to eat Bishul Akum. Why would a choila be eating Bishul Akum? It doesn't mean because he dafka needs his food. It means it's Shabbos. So on Shabbos, the choila for his sickness needs hot food or fresh food or a certain kind of food, and no one could cook on Shabbos. It's Shabbos. So you say, okay, we'll have the guy cook for the choila. The problem is if the guy cooks for the choila, it's going to be Bishul Akum. So the din is the Yid who's the choila is allowed to eat Bishul Akum on Shabbos. Okay? Because he needs for his chayla, even though it's an issa drabanan.
Chayla she'ein b'sakana.
Chayla she'ein b'sakana.
Chayla she'ein b'sakana.
Chayla she'ein b'sakana. No, chayla she'ein b'sakana. That's not a chiddush over there. Okay? The chayla she'ein b'sakana.
Chiddush is only it's mutter for the Jew Matzah Shabbos.
No. Because those din are separated from each other. This din of that a chayla could eat is in Shin Chav Ches. Okay, and Mechaber says chayla that eat Bishul Akum. The Mishnah says because it's chayla she'ein b'sakana. Even though usually we'd be machmer to say you can't eat yisur d'Rabbanan, here you could be mekel. Now there's that's one part. We're up to the second part. We'll get into the second part in a second. So now you might think that din that a chayla is allowed to eat it, even though it's an issa d'Rabbanan, is because it's a cool of Bishul Akum. Bishul Akum is not such a strong issa d'Rabbanan, like we saw a second ago. It's ein le'ikum and a terror. Maybe you might think that that's what it is, but that's not the truth. The reason why a chayla is allowed to eat Bishul Akum on Shabbos is because of the ra'ah. It's our same ra'ah says that a chayla could eat Bishul Akum on Shabbos. That's the makar for this din. What does he say? He says there's no chasnas when he eats Bishul Akum on Shabbos. He doesn't explain, but I think what he means is that if a guy makes food for me because he's my friend, might lead to chasnas. If the guy makes it for me because he's a nurse in the hospital, because he's doing me a service, he's helping me with some medical need, that doesn't lead to chasnas. So whatever, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if that's what he means. So he says there's no chashash of chasnas, so you're allowed to eat the food. It's the same ra'ah that we've been talking about says this application. Okay?
Who said it?
The ra'ah, the same ra'ah
himself said.
The same ra'ah who said our din says, and another thing, then if you cook you're allowed to eat it on Shabbos because there's no chasnas there either. That's another. The ra'ah himself says that's what it is. Okay? So it's not because it's a cool of Bishul Akum. It says there's no chashash of chasnas. It's not us at all. And the ra'ah says, and then in Cain, what's the difference? Here comes an afternoon, which is what about after Shabbos? What happens if you want to eat the food after Shabbos? What happens if a bari wants to eat the food? Now the bari can't eat the food on Shabbos because of or may not be able to eat it because of technicalities, because he's married b'shvila. There might be technicalities why the bari can't eat it on Shabbos. But what happens after Shabbos? If you would say that it's a kula because it's ein le'ikum l'Torah, some kind of kula Bishul Akum, then a person who's not a chayla couldn't eat it. But the Rah says a bari can eat it after Shabbos. It's not Bishul Akum. It's like saying if it was nechal chayim, anybody can eat it. So here he says it's not Bishul Akum because there's no chashash of chasnas. When you're making it for a chayla, it's what the Ramah calls it the chol ki agavna hakever ika. Whatever the Ramah over here is bringing the words from the Ra'ah. It's saying that you can eat it after Shabbos. Even a bari can eat it because it's not Bishul Akum. Okay, it's not anything that Chazal asked. Okay, so that's another application of the same machlokes, the Rashba and the Ra'ah. That's why the Ramah is over. Parts of why the Ramah is over here. So what do we say over here? Here we're being makel also. We're saying that the Ramah says we could be makel to eat this food because foods that don't have the chashash of chasnas, in certain times when the food doesn't have a chashash of chasnas, there's no issa Bishul Akum. Okay, and that's why the bari is allowed to eat it. Okay? That's the Ramah says it over here. The Ramah is meramis to it in Aruch also. If Hilchos Shabbos in a different place in Kofi Yud Ches, he's meramis to it. And the Mishmur over there brings it. The Sharatzin in Kof Chav Ches says that you should be machmir, not like the Rash, not like the Ramah. The Ramah said a bari is allowed to eat it after Shabbos. Even a bari is allowed to eat it after Shabbos. The Sharatzin brings that no, you shouldn't be. Samachan that there are many who argue on that. What the Taz? There are many who argue on that and say no, the bari is not allowed to eat it, and therefore we shouldn't eat it. Okay, so again, it's the same point that we were saying beforehand, which is min hadin we might pass in like the Ra'ah. That really doesn't apply with the chashash of chasnas doesn't apply. We might be mutter in specific cases, but mitzad chumrah would be machmir and say don't do the thing. So we kasher the kelim, and we don't follow the Ramah, and we say a bari shouldn't eat it after Shabbos. Okay, brought as a chumrah. Okay, and the hint that it's being brought as a chumrah is because the same sharatzin. I'm sorry, not the same sharatzin. The same sharatzin says, but what happens if the guy cooks food on Shabbos? And he cooked food Bishul Akum, so he says you shouldn't eat that food after Shabbos, but you don't have to kasher kelim. Or it says yesh, there's what to be samachan for not kasher kelim after Shabbos. Okay, which is to say is to go that far to say not only don't eat the food but even kasher kelim after Shabbos. That's going too far. So it's like sort of like we're taking a little bit,
right? So it could be on the kasher kelim altogether.
Right,
and it could be kasher kelim. Could be that.
So I didn't say it that way because it's really not true. Really, it's not two tzirufim because
it's the same
both
thing.
the exact same thing. They're both the same ra'ah. It's lines apart from each other. It's the same ra'ah from the same store. It's not. I don't think his point is exactly to say it's like sort of a manushach or a sveka. It's sort of like we're only going to take the chum. I'm saying Rabbi Shach would have said, I can't even talk about this case, but the same point Rabbi Shach saying, we're being machmir to say, treat it as if it's macholos asuras. So we're machmir, don't eat it. We're machmir for a certain way. Machmir usually to tell people kasher kelim, but to tell you, the food was mutter on Shabbos. There was a person who was allowed to eat it. The chayil could eat it. So you don't eat it. But then go, and then kasher kelim, so that was like already going too far. So I'm saying the same kind of thing, which is where min hadin, in min hadin, it seems like there's many people who are saying to go like the Rashba, like the Ra'ah, but mitzad chumrah to not go like the Rashba, not to go like the Rashba in a bunch of applications, more or less in different cases. Okay, okay. We have to do a few things quickly if we want to finish. Okay, which is, one is we asked a question. We asked this 2 times. First in Tafman days, in Hagal scale, and after in Kufi days. The same question, which is that there's a little bit of a problem. It's not so much a problem for us, Lamaisa, but it's a problem in understanding, which is I told you that we paskin, the Shach says it right here, that Bishul Akum is about the Baroif. Yeah, and the Mechaber implies, and that's what most people accept, that you have to kasher, you have to Bishul Akum. Okay? The Mechaber also holds, as does the Ramah, that a keli that's asul l'shtamish b'Shefah doesn't need to be, you could use it without kashering. What does that mean? If you have a kli, that the amount of treif that's in there will definitely be bottled into the next food. There isn't a question it will be bottled into the next food. You don't have to kasher it. Why? Because you only kasher because of tam kiyakar. Might make the next food treif. If it's physically impossible, not that you happen to be doing it that way, it's physically impossible to make the next food treif, then you don't have to kasher. So if the thing is going to be bottled baroiv, that means it's never going to ask the next food. It's not possible. I mean, unless you have a very unusually shaped kli, it's basically impossible. The next food shouldn't have more size than the amount of bli that's in there. So how could it be? Why should you have to kasher? So that, in other words, the Rajba and the Ra are arguing whether the bli is asr. And the Ra is saying, don't kasher because the bli is not asr. Fine. Let's say the bli is asr. Even if the bli is asr. So why do you have to kasher it anyhow? If you had cooked chazer in there in a way that was asr l'shamish b'Shefah, the Mechaber and the Rambam both hold. You don't have to kasher.
According to what you're saying, it's not true. Right?
That what?
Because really, the reason why you have to kasher is because you hold that it's not bottled baroiv.
Oh, you're saying, we're saying to kasher as if we hold like the Rajba. We're saying we're being machmir to say like the Rajba as if it's bottled b'shishim, which is true. Many people say like that. They connect these shittas. Since we're doing this chumrah, so it doesn't logically follow through. Because really it's bottled baroiv, but we're being machmir for the Rajba. So we could just
why machmir not there.
Okay,
that you have to explain. Right?
Got it. Okay, so you're saying good answer. You're saying that we're choosing to be machmir because we're choosing to be hush for the Rajba in this specific situation for whatever reason we don't know. For whatever reason, so that gets wrapped together with being bottled b'shishim. Okay, that's a good answer. I'll take that. Okay.
What were you going to say?
I don't have a good answer. I have bad answers. I have 4 answers to the question. You have a much better answer. So we'll take that. Good answer. Okay. 2 more things. Okay. First is when in Hagal's Kalim, way at the beginning of when we started learning Hagal's Kalim, we brought what the Ramah brings over here, and what the Mechaber brought over here, that if you want to kasher after Bishul Akum was made in the kli, and using the kli in the kli chera, so you would think you'd have to throw it out. So the Mechaber said, no, you don't have to. You could do Hagal 3 times. Okay, that thing comes from Sefer Itur, and the Sefer Itur first starts off by saying that maybe by all Yisroel Rabbanan you should be allowed to do 3 Hagalos after cheres. What's his reason? His reason is because when you kasher kli cheres, you get out a lot of blia, but you don't get all the blia out. Okay, so we'll use it. I might not be accurate the way I'm saying this, but if you say that there's 10 gallons of Isser absorbed into the kli, so if you, 1 ounce of Isser absorbed into the kli, okay, there's 1 ounce of Isser absorbed into the kli. If it's a kli cheres, and you kasher, you're only going to get out 3/4 of the ounce. Okay, you get 3/4 of the ounce out. So he says, well, if you kasher it 3 times, you keep kashering it again. He has a right from Yerushalmi. He's not making this up completely, but he has a right from Yerushalmi. You do it enough times, so the first time you got out 3/4 of the ounce. The next time you get out even more and more. Eventually, there's so little left that wouldn't be a problem. He thinks that it should maybe be mutter by all Yisroel Rabbanan. That's what he thinks the Yerushalmi says. He says, you know what? We'll say that the Yerushalmi is only by case of Yisroel Rabbanan she'ein lo ikim min haTorah, a lower grade of Yisroel Rabbanan, and so that's what he settles on. That it's only by that thing, of which we know of 2 cases. In ikim min haTorah, one is Bishul Akum, is a Issa Doron she'ein lo ikim min haTorah, and the other one is Chalas Chutz La'aretz. Okay, which, just for the side, we don't usually kasher if the house puts on. So what we do is we just mafresh challah on the blias. That's what we do. It's easier than kashering. Okay? You just take a batter. This is a really side point. Take a batter that's tevel, and you mafresh challah from the tevel, and for the blias that are inside the kli. Okay, and then that's an easier way than trying to kasher. But anyhow, so so that's what Sefer Yitz says. Okay, now. At that time, when we talked about it then, we didn't talk about it another time. I'm going to talk about it for a minute here, which is, there's two types of kelim that need libun. One type of kli that needs libun is a kli cheres. You can't kasher it without doing libun to it. There's another kind of kli that needs libun, and that is a kli that was used with the food directly on the fire. You have a broiler, you put the food right into a pan and put it right into the fire. That pan needs to be kasher with libun. So, the question is, does the Sefer Eater's kula apply to the second case also? He says that by kli cheres. Kli cheres, it's balea. You have to kasher with libun to get a little bit of that. You can do 3 hagalos. Would he say the same thing if you had a kli that was used right on the fire, and you want to get the bliyas out, could you do 3 hagalos to that also? Okay. Does the same thing apply? Wherever you do libun, could you maybe for Bishul Akum, get away with 3 hagalos? Okay, so, Rabelski came up with a kal v'chomer. Okay, kal v'chomer said it's mutter. Okay, what's the kal v'chomer? The Gemara says like this: if you have cooked on a fire a carbon directly on the fire, the carbon was heter when you cooked it, then you don't have to kasher that spit with libun. You could do hagala to it, since it went in as heter. You could kasher it with hagala. You don't have to kasher it with libun. Okay, negate to us is if you have a pan, a frying pan. This happens all the time. It happened yesterday. We got the shiloh. You have a frying pan that was cooked. Someone cooked fleishiks. Had a fleishik frying pan, and they cooked milchiks in it. When the frying pan was eina ben yomen, so that pan is not basar b'cholav. It has bliyas of basar and it has bliyas of cholav. It's not basar b'cholav. It's both. It's basar and cholav. It's not basar b'cholav. So it has 2 bliyas of heter. Okay, so the Rukvega says, in that case, is a case of its heter was absorbed into the kli. You can kasher it with hagala. You don't need to do libun. Okay? Even though it was cooked right on the fire, they had meat one day and a piece of cheese, and the next day right on the fire, you could do hagala. You don't have to do libun. Okay, because it's heter. When you have heter, you don't have to. When the bliyah is heter, you don't have to do hagala. But that thing is not true. It was a kli cheres. If you had cooked in a kli cheres heter, you would have to throw the kli out. You can't do hagala. You don't say do hagala and that's good enough. So what does Rabelski say? What that shows you is that the amount, 3 hagolas, hagola takes out more bliya from a kli that's used directly on the fire than it does out of a kli cheres. Imkain, if the Sefer Yitz says that 3 hagolas for an Eil Ikum Natara works when the kli cheres, kol shekain that should work for a kli that was on the fire. Okay, I have a feeling that we'll shoot in the cheshbon. But yeah, Rabelski makes kal v'chomer. Okay. He brought up, there's a different makil. Different makil says exactly what Rabelski says. Okay, Rabbi Shechter. It's going to get too complicated, so I'm going to skip most of this. Rabbi Shechter thought that it was not a riot. He held that the bliyas worked differently. And one of the things that Rabelski said is, just what we get to our part is, Rabelski said is, you should know, no one ever said that when you kasher a kli from Bishul Akum, you should have to do libun. There's no one who ever says such a thing that you have to do libun. Okay, he can't find me an example. Okay, so I'm skipping to this part. Is a little part to mention is that in fact our Rashba said that. Okay, now there's a question in Gears over here. The Rashba, as it's printed in the Torah Sabayis, says if you use the kli for Bishul Akum, if the shifcha cooked the food with Bishul Akum, you would have to do hagala or libun. Each kli like according to the way it was used. So you have to do hagala or libun. Each kli the way it was used. Okay, that's the way our Rashba says in Torah Sabayis. If you look in the Rashba, the way the Bishul brings, he skips that word. The libun word is not in there. Okay, it's not in there. So you could think to ask, Tony Rabelski, that the Rashba does say you should have to libun. Okay, if you look at the Rashba in the Torah Sabayis, it's much like the last words of the Rashba. He says you have to do libun. Okay, in fact, it's not true. It's not really a question, because what's the next words of the Rashba?
I don't understand. Why is Rabelski saying you never have to do libun based on
Bishul Akum?
Why?
You have to do 3 hagalos. 3 hagalos would be good enough.
Because of the 3 hagalos?
Yeah, you do 3 hagalos. You're not saying to do not do anything. You have to do 3 hagalos would be good enough.
I mean, according to him, it's technically possible to do libun. If I want to do libun, there are 3 hagalos.
Oh, okay. That's it. I have a better answer. The next words in the Rashba are, or if it's a kli cheres, you throw it out. You do hagala or libun, or throw it out. It's a kli cheres. Okay, so the Rashba obviously didn't hold like the Sefer Eater that you could do 3 hagolos for klicheres. He says, or you throw it out if it's a klicheres. Okay, so since he obviously didn't hold the Sefer Eater, it's not a kasha. Why he said you have to leave him? Okay, Rebelski's whole thing is a cheshbon of his kal v'chomer based on the Sefer Eater. The Rashba doesn't hold with the Sefer Eater. The Rashba says, or if it's a klicheres, you have to throw it out.
We don't need to hold the Sefer Eater.
We do so hold like the klicheres. For Bishul Akum we do. It's right in the Machaber. We just said it.
For Bishul Akum.
But he's talking about Bishul Akum. The Rashba says, you make sure that if the goyim cook in your house, you stir the pots, because or else you're going to have to kasha the kelim with hagola, or leave it, or throw it out if it's a klicheres. So by saying, or throw it out if it's a klicheres, we're not going to say for eating. What is it? Do 3 hagolas. That's easier than throwing it out. Okay? So you see that he doesn't hold he doesn't hold the sefer eater. So therefore he could say libane. Okay? Now to end on the bright note, no, really, since we're sitting here in the CRC building, is a shayla from Rabbi Schwartz. Okay? Which is, shouldn't end the Rabbi Schwartz, but end the Rabbi Schwartz. Which is, what happened like this? A person was becoming a ger. Okay, so in order to become a ger, they have to learn all about mitzvahs. And they have to, if we use the word practice, doing mitzvahs. They go to shul, they do all kinds, they practice keeping Shabbos, sort of. They do all kinds of things. That's what gerim do. All gerim do that. So the ger was practicing keeping kosher. They were learning how to do it. They started keeping kosher. So the ger bought new pots and pans, kasha in the kitchen, whatever they did. I think in this case they bought new pots and pans, and they were running a kosher kitchen. They were getting used to keeping kosher, which I guess that's what they're supposed to do. They were learning how to do it. Came along the gerus. They became a ger. On Tuesday they became a ger. So came Tuesday and said, oh my gosh, yesterday I cooked in my pots. It was Bishul Akum. I cooked in my own pots. So my pots are Bishul Akum. So I have to kasha my kelim because I just made my food. The Machaber says if you have Bishul Akum, you have to kasha your kelim. So now what we're not going to talk about is, we're assuming that the guy is allowed to trust himself. The ger is allowed to trust himself. Meaning, yesterday a guy cooked in his pots. How does he know that the pots were used for kosher?
That's not true.
Okay, so he could trust.
You know bitter.
Okay, and what about the people who come to his house? If you want to eat in his house, so we're not going to talk about that. If you come to his house, you have to trust him. A guy cooked in the pots. Okay, so we'll put them aside. But the child that he answered, Rabbi Schwartz was, well, good. So they have to Kashrus kelim. To which Rabbi Milchuk asked the question. So Rabbi Schwartz said, of course. He says, we tell all of our people, gerim, who know what they're doing, we tell them, you should taka eat kosher. You practice keeping a kosher home, milchiks, inflations, and kosher things. But don't kasher your kelim yet. Eat kosher on treif kelim. And only when you buy new pots, so you're going to get ready to kasher, do that after the gerus. Don't bring out your new pots until you're... Now maybe there's other reasons. You want to make sure they get it right, because they're practicing. They don't know what they're doing. But he says, yeah, taka, because of Bishul Akum, you have to kasher the kelim. So Mamela, he says, when you buy your new dishes or you kasher your kitchen, don't do that until after the gerus happens, or when you won't be cooking anymore. So then you shouldn't have to kasher. Okay.